We're in Esther chapter 2, and we've gotten down to verse 8. You remember from chapter 1 to chapter 2, as we read our Bibles, I think we need to think about this from time to time. A lot of times we read through and we think, oh, this happened right, bing, bang, 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 bang. Well, it doesn't work that way. In chapter 1, even though it appears like, oh man, chapter 2 really fits this. Just one thing right after the other. But there's actually 4 years in between here, and thank you. There's actually 4 years in between here, and during that 4 years there was a major war that the Persians fought against Greece and lost badly. So remember that in between the two chapters. This actually happens after he gets back. What happens in chapter 2, after he got back from this terrible defeat. Now, in verse 8 and 9, it says, "So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her her things for purification, which such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her out of the king's house, and he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women." I might mention one other thing here. When we pronounce these names, usually we don't pronounce them right. For instance, Haggai, H-E-G-A-I, in their language, the E is an A sound, the A is an A sound, and the I is an E sound. But just a little side note. Many maidens were brought to Shushan. Remember, this was one of the palaces that they had in Persia, and they were placed in the care of Haggai, who appears to be the chief eunuch of the king's harem as they're gathering. Now, there will be another chief who's above him in the king's house. That's another group of the harem. But those who were being prepared to go into the final harem would have gone through him first, and he had a lot of control, apparently. Notice that Esther quickly gained Haggai's favor. And he provided her very quickly. Notice the language there. He provided her very quickly with the things that she needed for purification process. Now, I believe we talked about that a little bit last week, but he also gives her 7 handmaidens. Notice that. These are basically, today we would call them, in that society, they were slaves to her. They answered to her, not to anybody else. They answered to her. Now, of course, they could do something so badly that the chief of the harem would get onto them, but they were her handmaids. She could do with them as she pleased. Notice also that he showed his favor to her by moving her and her handmaids into what we'd call the choicest living place of the harem, or those who are being prepared to go into the final harem. Both are harems, make no mistake about that. And again, we emphasize how God is working to save his people. As we pointed out, I think one other time, the name God is never found in this book. And yet you cannot deny the fact that God's providence, he's working through his providence to accomplish his goal, to accomplish what he wants to be done. And remember, the Jews are very important in this captivity. Oh yeah, he's punished them, but he's going to keep a portion of them, a remnant, alive. Why? Because of Messiah. Messiah has to still come through these Jews. So she had indeed been brought to the kingdom, Esther had, for such a time as this, as will be pointed out later on in chapter 4 and verse 14 by Mordecai. Now, those who prepared themselves to serve God, they're always going to be ready when God calls. We don't understand how God's providence works. We can't. It's impossible for us. But you stop and go back. Just as a side note, I know personally from serving a number of congregations over the years that if I had met the problems that were in some of those congregations when I first began preaching, I probably would have messed it up big time because I wasn't ready. I hadn't learned enough things and to make it where I could smoothly help the people get through certain times and things. And that's true of all of us. Jenny's job that she has now, she had all of these things that happened, even some firings, being fired. I got fired too a number of times for preaching on things that the brethren didn't want to hear. The truth. But all of those times add up, and they make you better prepared for the future. So those who prepare themselves, we need to remember, are ready when God needs us for whatever purpose it is. Look at verse 10 and 11. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Notice, first of all, that Esther had not told people that she was a Jew. Didn't tell them. She didn't let them know that Mordecai, at least initially, was her uncle. Why? Because if she had, that would have automatically said, I'm a Jew. And so she didn't tell anybody that. But why? Why didn't she tell people? Why didn't she, was she not proud of her lineage? Someone might say that, or I don't want people to know who I'm related to. Why, I got some real skunks in my family tree. Well, we all do. We may not like to admit it, but if you go back far enough, you're going to find some real skunks in your family tree. Horse thieves, bank robbers, whatever. And another thing that's always interested me, people make a big deal out of slavery. But if you go back in your lineage, and if you could go back and see all of the lineage, you would find out that every single one of us, about 95%, have all had slaves in our family. The Norse people, the Vikings, they were constantly enslaving people to work for them. We've all had that in our families. So why wasn't she willing to say who she was related to? Because Mordecai told her not to reveal this information. We're in Esther chapter 2, verse 10 right now, 10 and 11. So Mordecai told her not to reveal her lineage. Where'd you come from? Now, when you consider that in text, does it reveal that maybe there was going to be a time of hostility toward the Jews? Stop and think about it. It has always been the case that there has been rebellions, persecutions of the Jewish people, that's always existed. In fact, Jesus in the New Testament told them that it was going to be that way, and in part because it was going to be that way for them after that time was because they had rejected him. They'd rejected Jesus, the Son of God. And the Jewish leadership, they knew exactly who he was, even though they often pretended that they didn't know that he was Messiah. So consider this in this text. Was Mordecai astute enough? Maybe he had heard rumors of persecution coming to his people? We don't know. Maybe that's why he told her. Maybe he felt an undercurrent of persecution coming. We don't know. But consider the concern also that was seen in these two verses of Mordecai for the welfare of Esther. How did he show that? The text says that he walked every day before the court of the women's house. How could he do that? Oh, remember, once a woman went into this process of being in the king's harem, normal men couldn't be around them, couldn't have normal conversations, couldn't have normal contact with them. They could never remember remarry or marry anyone else except the king, with the exception that if he was making an alliance with some other king of another nation, then he might swap a wife for a son-in-law, etc. He wanted to know two things about Esther as he walked before the court where she was, probably the outer building. How is she doing? What does this show about Mordecai? It shows how much he cared about this girl that he had adopted because her mom and daddy had died when she was very young. He wanted to know what's going to become of her. Is she going to be the one who's chosen as queen? Maybe. Or is she going to become just another member of the harem under the queen? Maybe. Or is she going to be traded, so to speak? I know we don't like that kind of thinking in our time, but we need to place ourselves in their time to understand what's going on. Is she going to be traded to another king for a son-in-law? And we don't know. How would he know how Esther was doing? No male outside of the eunuchs who took care of them, or the king himself, or if she was invited while high officials were with the king to be in their presence, no other man would ever be around her. She would never, understand this, she would never be allowed to be in the presence of Mordecai by herself, even though he acted as her father. That brings a lot of questions about Mordecai. How could he even be that close to where the harem was being developed? Was he a porter already at one of the gates? Was he himself a eunuch and serving as a porter at the gate? Did he hold a prominent position in the court? If he held a prominent position in the court, he would have some opportunities. And we're going to notice something. He was by the gate, and he's going to get some information because he was by the gate. And gates serve an important place in the Old Testament among the Jews and among other foreign nations of that. This is the place where they held court. You're going to see as you study the book of Ruth, it was at the gate where the people gathered to make decisions about different things, and Ruth, the decision that she would become the wife of Boaz because there was another who was first in line who could claim her as his wife, he had to allow that process to go through. And when that man then decided, no, I don't want her for my wife, then Boaz could take her as his wife. And so it was at the gate. Major decisions were made at the gate. You know, we look at cities a lot differently than they did. Today, when you drive into a city and you see a big sign, welcome to the city of whatever, big deal. But the gates of the cities in those times, the entrance to that city was a big deal. Most likely, by Esther's command, some of those who cared for her, eunuchs, were funneling information to Mordecai at this time. Later on, you'll see a direct reference to that very thing. Some of those who cared for her, took care of her, guarded her, were going to be dealing with Mordecai. But at this time, we're not given the direct information. Again, note the evident concern that Mordecai had for Esther. It's commendable. Even though he wasn't directly in her life anymore, he cared deeply about what happened to her. Let's look at verses 12 through 14. Now when every maid's turn was come to go in to the king Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king, whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in and unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she was called by name. So we get a lot of information here. All the maids, notice, went into the king 1 year after that purification process. You know, there are a lot of interesting things about that. Basically, what this is talking about is things to purify her, to make her smell better, and things of that nature. And why it took a year, I have no idea. I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, but when I was in Vietnam, on certain missions that we were going to be going deep into enemy territory for General Pierce, we would change our diet. We wouldn't eat the normal food we ate. We ate food that they would have eaten. Why? Because you would smell us. You could smell that, oh, there's an American in the area. All of us have this based on the food that we eat. Every single one of us. And this is part of what was going on. The king wants people around him who are going to be like him. During this process time, not only would this cleansing, so to speak, take place, but also they would have to be prepared how to act like a queen. A lot of protocols. You know, we kind of mock sometimes the protocols. We'll read about some odd thing that, you know, for instance, in England, you can't eat your meal when you come to a banquet or something until the queen takes the first bite. We mock that, you know, we say, oh, that's kind of weird. But it's protocol. She's going to have to learn how to act like a queen in case she's the one chosen. Why such a long purification process? Well, it probably had something to do with that learning process. So why several baths? Much shorter time is needed. It only took us about 6 days of eating that other food to make it where the enemy couldn't smell us. We could smell them. We knew what to smell for. Possibly the answer is seen when you turn over to the book of Daniel. Daniel and the others who were chosen to possibly serve the king were going to be examined. And it wasn't just physically. When you look at the 3 friends of Daniel and Daniel himself, there was a process. They were supposed to eat the king's food, but a Jew couldn't eat the same kind of foods that the king could eat. They couldn't eat pork. They couldn't have a good old catfish like you and I like many times. There were certain foods that God had restricted them in their diets. They couldn't eat those foods, and the king would. And his dainties, that's what it's talking about when it talks about his dainties. He would be eating what they considered to be the best foods. And you remember they asked for vegetables. Let us eat vegetables and drink water. We can't drink the king's wine. Why? They couldn't drink that alcoholic beverage. It was against the law of their God. And that's extremely important. When you look at some of these characters that are revealed to us in the Bible, you're going to see a people who were very concerned about obeying God no matter what it cost them. Remember those 3 boys later on in Daniel? The king set up this great golden statue, and he gave commandment when the instruments of music started playing, everybody bow down to that statue, remember? What did those 3 boys do? We're not doing it. Don't you know that can cost you your life? Don't you know the king said, if you don't bow down to that statue, we're going to throw you into a fiery furnace? We're going to burn you alive. Can't do it. Why? Because God told them no. You don't bow down to any image. It's talking about images that were used for worship. You don't worship any false god, no matter who it is. You know what a lot of folks today would do? And unfortunately, folks, this is in the Lord's church too. A lot of folks would sit back and say, oh, what would it hurt? They won't know that I'm really not worshiping that God. What would it hurt? Why, it'll save my life. Too many people today have that attitude, unfortunately. Faithful people in the Bible didn't have that attitude, and we shouldn't either. If our government tomorrow told us that we had to do something that violated our religion, I don't care what it is, we have to be willing to take whatever consequences that physical government brings on us because we refuse to do what they tell us to do that violates the law God has given us, even if it means our death. Just like Daniel, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What were their Hebrew? We know them by their Persian names. What were their Hebrew names? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Their character is going to be examined. Daniel's character, the character of his 3 friends, it wasn't just the food they ate. They had to learn languages, as Daniel shows us. They had to learn the language of the king. And they had to learn all of these various things. Could this woman act like a queen? Does she have the mental ability to serve in that capacity? All of these things would have to be learned. And so it took a year. Another possibility was to see if this young woman was chaste. Was she actually a virgin? Remember, that was the word that was used in the text, and it's the word that's in the original, and it literally means a woman who has never had a physical relationship with a male. When each maid's time came, she went in to visit the king. And she was allowed to take whatever she wanted with her to meet the king. Well, what's that all about? It probably dealt with the clothes she decided to wear, the jewels that she might put on, the perfume that she might put on herself to make herself appeal to what she thought would appeal to the king. Now, we men are used to that, aren't we? Our women do that all the time, don't they? Oh, I can't wear this today. What do? You remember when you were dating your wife, your present wife? Remember those days, men? Not many of us in here, but what did they do? They were always late, weren't they? Why? Oh, they're busy making themselves appear as pretty as they could for us. That's what these women were doing when they got ready to go into the king. She probably chose things that would make her more visibly attractive to the king. But we learned something about this lady, didn't we? Oh, the Bible, the words that are used, the original words, show us that she was not only exceptionally beautiful on the outside, but she was also beautiful on the inside. She was kind. She was considerate of others. She was a person that was easy to get along with, not just easy to look at. That would be important to the king. And after her visit with the king, notice the text tells us that she was not going to go back to the same place that she had been before. She's now moved into another area of the king's harem. She's sent to another house of the kings. They had a number of these houses, and usually by rank is who stayed in them. Does this particular woman please the king partially, or, well, she'd be in a lower part? If she was one who pleased him more, then she'll be in a higher part. She was sent to the house of the king's concubines. She'd reached another stage, which was watched over by a man named Shazgaz. Let's look at verses 15 through 18. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abigail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto the king Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast, and he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. How many women went into Ahasuerus? We don't know. Probably it was a large number, because notice it says the turn of Esther. And from my studies, I saw that in the original and other references, that it was figured that it would be quite a large number of women that had been gathered for this purpose, for him to choose a queen. But notice that she required nothing when her time came. In other words, she didn't say, well, I gotta have this best gown over here and the best jewelry here, and let me... She required nothing. Instead, she told Haggai, you go ahead and choose for him, whatever you think. Basically, she told this chamberlain. Now notice that word chamberlain, because that also represents not just someone who was a eunuch, but someone who was of high rank, to pick whatever he wanted for her. You know what? He could have picked rags for her, couldn't he? Because God had a plan. And through his providence, Esther is going to be the queen, because something's going to happen later where her being the queen as a Jew is going to save her people. God had a plan. He could have dressed her in rags and it wouldn't have mattered one little bit. And let me suggest this to you. A lot of times people want to dress up real fancy and all this stuff. It doesn't really matter what we look like on the outside. Oh, we sometimes judge that way, don't we? We see someone that's obviously down and out and pushing a shopping cart in front of them with all their worldly goods in it, and we tend to look at them and say, but we shouldn't. What's the person like on the inside? Because that's what's really important. What I look like, this old ugly person that I am and have become over the years because of all the scars and what Agent Orange has done to my body and caused all these things on my arms and head, doesn't mean a thing. What am I inside? That's the real me. This is just a shell that I live in, isn't it? God doesn't care about this outside. Oh, he wants us to take care of it. But he doesn't care. What matters to him is what we are on the inside. What am I? He could have picked rags for her and she would still have been the queen. And you think about this, she must have been an exceptionally beautiful woman, a woman to look at. Must have been. But it was both physical and inward. She was a beautiful, wonderful woman. And she was in a situation where a lot of these women wanted to be. You know, in our society, we often see this. We see some women that think that, oh man, if I could just get that rich guy to marry me, I'll do whatever it takes to get that rich guy to marry me. That means I've arrived. No, it doesn't. Doesn't mean that at all. She was in a situation where many of the women that were around her, they wanted to be in that situation, and yet there doesn't seem to be any jealousy by the other women toward her. God's providence is showing. It's obvious to anyone who's willing to look at it. I read one fellow, he says, oh, God's providence didn't have anything to do with it. God didn't have anything at all to do with her becoming queen. That man's rather foolish. That man really can't reason correctly, because you cannot read the book of Esther without seeing the providence of God. The picture I get, whether it's right or wrong, is that Ahasuerus was so impressed by Esther that he immediately made her his queen. That's the impression I get from the text. And again, remember, we don't see gaps in time like maybe we should through extra study and see this. We don't know. There may have been a gap. But I believe, personally, that he immediately made her his queen. Now, when we consider the rest of the evidence that's found in the book, it was more than just physical attraction. He's going to show great care and concern for her in the book later on. He truly cared for her. Remember earlier we said that, and we showed it last week, I believe, that even Vashti, I believe that he regretted what he had done to her and kicking her out of the queenship because of his drunken state and the advice of his advisors. He truly cared for Esther. And to celebrate his selection of a new queen, what did Ahasuerus do? Remember, his other name is Xerxes. He did three things. First of all, he threw a party for all of his princes. That is the upper echelon of the government, as we would think. Today, we might liken it to a president and his cabinet, or maybe even extend it to the House of Representatives and the Senate, and invited those folks. He threw a party for his princes and his servants. They were all his servants. And he named the feast after her. Notice that? He also made a release to the provinces. Now, what's that about? The original word here for release is hanakah. And it's a word that is really hard to define because it can carry so many different concepts. And when you read translations that are made in various commentaries, notice some of those with me. Release for paying taxes, from paying taxes. In other words, you don't have to pay taxes anymore. How many times does that happen? But under the ancient kings, they did do this sometimes. In fact, under the Roman occupation of the world of their time, there were times when they would release provinces of the Roman Empire from paying any taxes because of some huge natural disaster that had taken place, and they knew they couldn't pay them right now. They need to rebuild. Release from forced labor. In other words, the releasing of some of their slaves and let them go free. Or the release of some prisoners. Why, we see that, don't we, in the book of Acts? Don't we see the Jewish leaders demanding that Jesus be crucified? And it was his obligation, apparently, at that time of the year to release one prisoner to them, and he tried his best. Remember that. He tried his best to release Jesus. Pilate didn't want anything to do with Jesus because of his wife's warning, and this just man, this holy man, this Son of God. And they said, no way. He released Barabbas, a murderer and thief, an insurrectionist. Maybe some translate it as being released from military service. Again, this was something that was done in those times by, okay, go home. Unfortunately today, I know of one case where someone was released from the military recently just because apparently they didn't want to be in the military anymore. I'm not talking about an officer, because an officer could resign their commission, but I never heard in my day, when you got either drafted or you enlisted, it was for a specific amount of time, and you didn't have any choice about it. Shows how soft our military's gotten, unfortunately. That's another story. Ahasuerus also, notice, gave gifts according to the state of the king. What's that about? The state? This word state refers to the king's wealth. It's not talking about his position, although I'm sure his position would have something to do with his wealth, but it's talking about his wealth. He gave gifts, expensive gifts, to the people. Go back to chapter 1 and remember that, or maybe I'm thinking about Daniel. I may have gotten the two mixed up here. But anyway, one of those kings gave each one of them a golden goblet to drink their wine out of. The guest. Carson wrote something here that I thought was interesting and thought I'd share it with you. Is there any man so blind as not to perceive that it was entirely providential that such a small number of captive Jews should be found more beautiful than all the virgins of 127 provinces? can anyone question that God gave her that exquisite loveliness for this very occasion? It can't be denied, folks. And it's something that needs to be emphasized about this book over and over and over again. And it's something that needs to be emphasized in our time, even though we can't point to something and say, this was God's providence. There are events in my life, I mean, I'll just mention one of them. How can the guy on this side of me and this side of me get cut in half by a .60 caliber machine gun and I didn't get a scratch? I like to think that that was God's providence, but I'll never know in this life. I cannot know to positively be able to say that was God's providence. Does God work today in His providence? There's no doubt about it. New Testament shows us that. I think we're going to go ahead and stop because I'll not be able to get through this next section when we're supposed to quit at 1:45. So tonight we're going to quit just a few minutes early instead of late like we usually do.